Hey you, I'm Ali Amo, and this is the A Lease on Life podcast. I've just returned from Melbourne in Australia. I was invited to speak at Mind, Body, Spirit, a festival that was held in Sydney. I was invited to speak twice there in May, and then the festival moved to Melbourne and I was invited to speak there on Friday night, so I did. If you'd like to see the recording, actually, it's on my Facebook. I posted it so that anyone who wanted to see, who couldn't make it, could get amongst it. So feel free to jump on board. Fun fact, when I wrote my book, the other 11 chapters I did in 9 months. And this particular chapter, we're looking at the childhood element, took me 6 months for one chapter. I come at this so many different ways, and because of the cycles that I was looking at in particular and the depth and the heaviness of them, there were times when I thought it would be more beneficial for people reading to learn more about me and understand how those cycles were created and perpetuated by myself before I even knew that I could break them. And then I didn't want to make it about me because so many of us struggled in childhood, or if we survived childhood, we struggled later on when everything started surfacing again. So when I read this chapter, I want you to know that this was like the millionth edit that actually made the cut, and this took a long time. So the idea is for you to connect and understand yourself through what I share about myself in this. Here we go. Childhood. Have you ever wished you could be a kid again? The imprint childhood leaves on you is deep and everlasting. The memories are prominent and the programming is potent. As it is your beginning, it is the most formative time of your life, molding the very core of you. No other life stage is as critical to your growth and development, which is one of the many reasons why this element is fundamental to us all. Making sense of the self. Your childhood is where the groundwork was laid for your self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-beliefs. However, you weren't the one setting the tone for future you. That happened behind the scenes with those in your social sphere. You actually began to develop your self-knowledge through your exposure to the comments and criticisms of others. How you were spoken to and about as a child started to shape your self-perception, which is why you still may find remnants of this in your self-talk as an adult. How often do you repeat something negative about yourself that came from somebody else? Maybe it's just in your head, or you say it out loud. Regardless, those expressions are the result of a self-sphere cycle from your childhood, probably the first one that you ever created. The formation of the mental and emotional parts occurred when you experienced someone you knew saying negative things about you. This was usually based on comments about your abilities or perceived lack thereof, name-calling, labels, or criticisms. Often it was parental figures, siblings, relatives, friends, or teachers whose words left a lifelong mark. But the social sphere also includes coaches, pastors, and more. You were just a child gaining knowledge about yourself and the world when you were told some very specific information. Although it was circumstantial at best, it was presented to you as factual. So as a kid not knowing any better, you integrated it into your developing self-concept, which kick-started the inner parts of the cycle. Regardless of whether you heard it once or 1,000 times, those childhood voices echoed in your mind for so long that the words became a self-belief. Then those inner cycles will push their way out of you. No matter what form it took, The first time it was expressed, the formation of this childhood cycle was complete. How long it continued and how strong it became afterwards, however, was totally up to you. The words from one experience as a child with someone you had a relationship with was enough to inform your beliefs for a lifetime. The power of the 3 anchor elements is truly undeniable when you reflect on this cycle. The 3 anchor elements are the 3 fundamental elements in my web of life philosophy that form the core of you. They are beliefs, relationships, and experiences. The fact that most of us still repeat this cycle shows that our strongest ones began as children, which explains why they're so hard to break. However, experience has taught me that the ways we express childhood cycles get far more self-destructive than just repeating negative phrases from our past. Family matters. When I was young, all 20 relatives on my mother's side of the family would pile into my grandmother's 3-bedroom beach house for holidays. Mattresses replaced the living room floor, and a tent was pitched in the backyard for the overflow. Come dinner time, Nonna made enough gnocchi to feed an army, so we'd overeat, drink, and laugh across tables in 2 rooms. In memory of Nonno, we'd mix wine with lemonade to recreate his famous strawberry drink. Once our bellies were bloated and the burping began, so did the real fun. My cousins and I would leap from couch to couch, trying to escape being eaten by the shark lurking in the mattress ocean. Interestingly, it was the same 2 older male relatives who were forced to be the shark, at least to start anyway. I rarely think of times like these. Occasionally, when similar stories are shared by others, they may gently re-emerge. Yet rather than reminisce, I'll tell them my story to connect with theirs. The memories I'd rather forget, on the other hand, are forever burned into my brain. No matter how much I've tried to forgive or forget, share or suppress, heal or help it, they've always haunted me. Particularly these ones. My parents were playing in the pool with their friends when my 2-year-old brother fell in. I tried desperately to get their attention and help, but my panic screams were drowned out for so long he lost consciousness. My splash caught everyone's attention, but I dragged his lifeless body up the stairs and out of the pool by the time they reached us. Through their legs, I watched as he was given chest compressions and had lost all hope when he finally coughed up water and opened his eyes. The next afternoon, my mother told me I did a very brave thing. As she hyped up a reward that would buy me anything I wanted, my mind trailed off, thinking about my coming million. I was puzzled by the price paid for saving his life. I knew his funeral would have cost more than $1, as would my parents' grief. I guess she must have just assumed I was too young to have any idea about the value of money or of life. The only thing I was clueless about was what all of this was going to cost me. I started to find out a few days later when I told my cousins. With shock and excitement, they rushed outside to where our mothers were talking and shared the news. I followed with a proud smile that disappeared with the look my mother shot me. I stood in disbelief as she denied it and told them I was a liar before casually continuing her conversation with her sister. That was my introduction to the cycle of appearances. At 4 years old, I learned there was no limit to the sacrifices people are willing to make to protect their image. Then, over the next 30 years, I discovered the extraordinary lengths people will go to hide the truth and maintain it. My mother also let me down again later that year, except those screams being ignored resulted in me becoming sexually active. I was in kindergarten. There's a quote by Gabor Mate. Children don't get traumatized because they are hurt. They get traumatized because they're alone with the hurt. The ways I've buried these painful memories aren't half as bad as what I did with them, or rather what they did with me. I didn't realize I was giving them any kind of power when I defined myself by them, but it's an easy trap to fall into. Little did I know that this would also start the worst cycle I would ever come to know, and the hardest ever broken. The cycle of victimhood. You should already have ideas in your own minds about where this is going. And I think it's highly unlikely that this was never something that you've experienced. Maybe it was a cycle that you repeated for a short period. Maybe it was one that was a predominant part of your life, like it was for me. Maybe there was a health challenge that you experienced at some point in your life, and this cycle was how you integrated it. There's many ways that we can create, get stuck in, and repeat the cycle of victimhood. So, the cycle of victimhood. Having faced those situations alone was more than enough evidence to really get this cycle rolling. The mental and emotional parts pegged me as the victim, proven by what I'd gone through and my mother's actions and lack thereof. So as a child, the knowledge I integrated from those experiences was 1. The world was against me. 2. I'll always be on my own. And 3. I am powerless to change 1 and 2. These facts led me to believe that not only was I the victim, but that suffering was inescapable. It took me total self-destruction to realize that this colossal mistake enabled this cycle to take over my entire life. And I mean it. It took over my entire life. The worst part is that it took next to nothing for me to repeat it. I'd spiral internally in a matter of seconds whenever I faced anything even remotely challenging. As soon as an experience brought on the "here we go again" feeling, I would think this always happens to me. Any kind of expression in physical form would then complete the cycle and further solidify it in my web. At first, it was saying "story of my life" out loud in the face of opposition and obstacles, or when the feeling of defeat was too overwhelming, I would just avoid obstacles altogether. But as the cycle strengthened inside of me over time, so did the ways it came out. When your worldview is narrowed to see only victims and villains, your mind becomes adept at detecting them. When I learned about historical atrocities in school, it quickly established this as a global problem. Victims were everywhere. Aboriginal people, the planet, the foster kid in my class. The lens of suffering through which I saw life was also reflected in the way I retold stories, particularly my own. But by high school, this cycle had control of far more than just my perspective. Though it might sound strange, the main form of expression came through my posture. I didn't do it consciously, as is often the case with the physical part of the trifecta. It was as if I tried to protect myself from being hurt again, slouched over with my head down, rounded shoulders. There were other subtle expressions similar to this too, like being less feminine and more masculine. Keep in mind that many physical expressions are tied to the inner parts of a cycle, but it rarely ever begins with big or obvious behaviors. In fact, sometimes a cycle will never manifest into any major physical actions whatsoever. And there will also be those created in fear that only result in forms of inaction, like avoidance. In saying this, do not ever underestimate the power of subtle expressions or idleness to cause you long-term damage. I am still trying to correct my posture in my mid-30s. This cycle wasn't just expressed in what I did, but also precisely what I wouldn't. Like wear tight-fitting and revealing clothes, or trust anyone. Never being vulnerable was my shield, and unyielding strength was my sword. And trust me, you can ask anyone I went to high school with, they'd back that, 100%. It was me against the world. I would say and do hurtful things, thinking not to appear weak was self-preservation. It wasn't. It was self-sabotage. My tough exterior may have masked my pain and fear, but it cost me friendships, peace, and the best parts of my personality. I hated the person I had become. So the time was right for my escapism and self-loathing streak to meet substances. Cue an introduction to cigarettes and boom! The relationship took off like a rocket. Alcohol made some guest appearances at social events, not that smoking really needed a supporting act. The blackouts were welcome, but I got over it soon after I met Mary Jane. If marijuana was my gateway, then trauma walked me directly to it. I experimented with other things too, but smoking weed would suppress the inner cycles so I could sleep. It worked like a charm until everything started to surface in my early 20s, screaming to come out. Suddenly, my pain could no longer be numbed and I could no longer contain it. Eventually, I stopped sleeping altogether, and my addiction went way past the point where most people go to rehab. But still, I kept going. I ended up institutionalized a few times in a system some people can never be free of. Encouraged by my mother telling nurses my emotions fluctuate and I hallucinate childhood traumas, labels like psychotic and bipolar were tossed around. I fought like hell against medications that would have rendered me docile every day and infertile for life. I had a choice. Continue destroying myself with recreational drugs, or the next hospitalization would force it with pharmaceutical ones. This decision gave me the clarity to see that the cycle of victimhood required fuel in order to repeat. But there was no way that substances could have been that power supply because I hadn't been using them my whole life. The only source that could be relied upon to feed energy to a negative cycle is another one. This sudden awareness brought about a life-altering realization that victimhood needs validation. But the problem with this cycle is that no one can avoid its infliction because it's embedded into childhood, even if yours was perfect. I'll tell you now, the cycle of validation is a freaking whopper, and I'm going to save that for the next episode. That was me reading from Detangling the Web of Life, the complete guide to understanding you and everyone else by yours truly, Ali Amo. I am so appreciative of you being here for this ep because this is something that I've been needing to do since I started this podcast like almost 2 years ago. And it's something that I've been putting off like the plague because I didn't want to add too much to what I'd already written and I didn't want to just read what I wrote. So I'm trying to keep it short and sweet for you. I know life is lifing and this can be heavy as far as weight goes, but it can also be heavy on the brain. So thanks so much for being here with me for this ep. New ones come out to you every other Thursday. I will tell you up front, if you are listening on Thursday, the 12th of June, or it might be Wednesday in the US, 12th of June, Australian time, at 7 to 8 p.m, I'm running a free masterclass online, Break the Cycle in 2025. The links will be in the show notes, but you can also find them on my socials. And if you'd like to see the pardon me, that needed to be said. I'm going to leave that in there. Fuck editing that out. That was real. If you'd like to see the complete Web of Life philosophy, you can download it completely for free on my website at www.weboflife.au. You take it easy, beautiful people. I'll either catch you at the masterclass or I'll catch you next step. Much love.